The sky above station Threx Delta was the color of oxidized copper-greenish, streaked with rust-red clouds that moved like sluggish ink in water. A chill wind howled across the open ice plains outside the biodome, rattling the high glass corridors that connected the station's modules. Inside, the temperature was comfortably regulated, but the view beyond the reinforced windows made even the hardiest species tuck their appendages a little closer. Elias Crowder stood near one of those windows, his breath fogging the pain despite the dome's heat regulations. He'd been on Threx Delta for 4 months, part of the first interspecies exchange program backed by the Unified Galactic Accord. A sort of cultural immersion boot camp for species deemed interoperable. Elias wasn't sure what that meant exactly, but he was pretty sure it had something to do with being able to digest the local food without dying. It was supposed to be a learning experience, and so far, it had been. He'd learned how to survive off nutrient paste that smelled like burnt plastic, how to communicate in 3 dialects of Threxan trade cant, and how to make peace with the fact that the showers only ran every other day due to water rationing. But nothing prepared him for instructor Brunal. Brunal was tall, vaguely insectoid in structure, and wore a thin membrane suit that shimmered with a blue iridescence. It was said Brunal had trained over 80 species in survival and environmental adaptation. Brunal also had a reputation for assigning practical field challenges that made students question their career choices. That morning, Brunal had entered the learning hall without preamble and gestured toward the massive display wall. A satellite image of the frozen lake outside the dome flickered to life. Its surface was glassy, miles across, and flanked by jagged ice ridges. "You will cross the lake," Brunal announced in a low, vibrating tone. Elias blinked. "What? You will cross it," Brunal repeated, unassisted. "No aerial lift, no drone transport, no telekinetic support. Manual traversal only. You have 4 hours." One of the Vrelans, a species with 6 limbs and a natural resistance to cold, let out a cheer-up of excitement. Elias stared at the screen, then at Brunal. "Is that ice stable?" he asked. Brunal tilted its head. "Mostly. What happens if we fall through, you fail?" Elias frowned. "And die?" A pause. "Yes." Brunal handed out data slates with mission parameters, then turned and left without further comment. Elias exhaled slowly and looked at the others shuffling out of the room. The Vrelan was already chattering with 2 members of a bulbous aquatic race that looked like appended jellyfish in mobility suits. They all seemed excited. He, on the other hand, was calculating distances, weight distribution, wind direction, and the likelihood of dying of hypothermia before he even made it halfway back in his quarters. Elias dumped the contents of his gear locker onto the floor. Standard cold weather suit. Emergency beacon. Foldable crampons. A flexible tool set. A few meters of cable. A compact heat torch. Not much else. He sat on the floor, chewing on the inside of his cheek, then his gaze flicked to a maintenance schematic on the wall. It showed a breakdown of the station's outer modules, including storage lockers for decommissioned equipment. 30 minutes later, he was in one of those lockers, digging through dusty crates. He found what he needed: a pair of old hoverboard runners, a rusting alloy frame that looked like it once belonged to a cargo sled, and a spooling cable reel. Elias hauled the pieces back to his quarters and got to work. The runners had lost their power cores, but the rails were smooth and intact. He stripped the alloy frame down to a flatbed, bolted the runners beneath it, and reinforced the front with a curved panel salvaged from a ventilation duct. He rigged the cable into a harness system he could use to drag the sled like a dog sled. It wasn't perfect, but it was light, and it would glide. By the time he finished, his hands were numb and his knees ached from crouching. He tested the sled in the hallway. It moved easily. The runners skated across the smooth floor with barely any resistance. He checked the time. 70 minutes left. Outside, the wind had picked up, but the lake was calm. The ice glinted under the planet's twin suns. He suited up, strapped the harness over his shoulders, and dragged the sled to the dome's airlock. A small group of students had already departed. Brunal stood at the threshold, observing silently. "You modified equipment," Brunal said as Elias passed. I repurposed decommissioned materials, Elias replied. Brunal's eyes glowed faintly. Noted. The outer hatch opened with a hiss. Cold slapped him across the face like a wet towel soaked in liquid nitrogen. He stepped out, boots crunching over crusted snow. The lake stretched ahead, brutal and beautiful, a frozen mirror beneath the sky. Elias took a breath, then started running. The sled bounced behind him, then caught the momentum. He leapt onto it, landing in a crouch. The runners scraped over the ice, then smoothed out as speed picked up. Wind roared past his ears. The sled bucked slightly on uneven patches, but held steady. He leaned into the ride, steering by shifting weight and pulling on the harness lines. The sled curved left, then right, weaving through shallow cracks and frost ridges. He kept his eyes on the far shore, a smudge of white and shadow in the distance. Halfway across, a gust of wind slammed into him. The sled tilted. One runner caught on a raised edge of ice. Elias pitched sideways and rolled, the harness digging into his ribs. He hit the ice hard, skidding for several meters before coming to a stop. Pain bloomed in his right arm. He lay still for a moment, breathing in short gasps. The world spun. He forced himself up, cradling his wrist. Swollen. Maybe fractured, he couldn't tell yet, but he could still move his fingers. He limped back to the sled. The front panel had bent slightly, but the frame was intact. He repositioned himself, this time kneeling on the sled rather than crouching. Wind stung his eyes. He adjusted the harness lines and kicked off again. The sled surged forward. He passed another student, a gelatinous creature that had frozen solid halfway across, encased in a cracked mobility pod. Elias didn't stop. He couldn't. The pain in his arm was pulsing now, but the shore was closer. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward. Minutes later, the sled scraped onto the far bank and slid to a stop. Elias tumbled off, panting, his knees bruised and his arm throbbing. He lay there, blinking up at the pale sky. Brunal arrived exactly 11 minutes later, gliding across the ice with mechanical grace. It stopped beside him and looked down. "You crossed in 38 minutes. Elias sat up slowly. "Is that good?" Brunal paused. "It is remarkable." Elias winced as he stood. "I think I hurt my wrist. You will report to medical." He nodded, cradling his arm as he trudged toward the emergency tent set up at the perimeter. One of the Threxan aides scanned his wrist and frowned. "Possible fracture. We'll do a scan." Elias sat quietly while they ran the test. The results came back. A hairline fracture in the distal radius. Not a full break, but enough to require immobilization. "You'll need a splint for at least 4 weeks, the aide said. "No heavy lifting," Elias sighed. "Guess I'm not building anything else for a bit." He left the tent with his arm in a brace, and the sled parked beside him like a loyal dog. A few of the other students had arrived by then, panting and frostbitten. Some had crawled. One had tried to slide across on his stomach, which did not work. Brunal stood nearby, watching them all. "It was not a test of strength," Brunal said. "It was a test of adaptation." Elias glanced at the sled, then at Brunal. "Good, because I'm definitely not the strongest." Brunal's gaze lingered on him for a long moment. "But you adapted faster than any of them." The wind howled louder, rattling the emergency tents. Elias turned his head toward the lake, now crisscrossed with trails, broken pods, and collapsed forms. He exhaled slowly. "Next time," he muttered. "Maybe assign something with less ice." Elias sat on the edge of the infirmary cot, his knees bouncing with a slow, nervous rhythm while a Threxan medic wrapped his wrist in a stabilization sheath. The material was soft and warm, like memory foam soaked in gentle static. The alien's limbs moved with elegant efficiency, 2 of them working on the brace while a third held up a scanner. "You have a very inefficient skeletal design," the medic said without looking up. "Thanks," Elias muttered. "I'll be sure to pass that on to evolution." The medic's eyes, a glossy black stripe that curved across its head like a visor, blinked in a wave pattern. "You are fortunate the damage did not extend into the joint capsule. Though your bones are unusually dense for a species of your stature." Elias shifted, watching the scanner's display flicker with bone overlays. "We break easy, but we hold together better than we look. That is not encouraging." "I didn't say it was." The medic finished the wrap and pressed a button. The sheath activated with a soft hiss, conforming to the contours of his wrist and locking into place. A mild tingling spread through his hand. You will experience occasional pulses as the sheath stimulates cellular repair. Do not remove it. Wasn't planning to, Elias said, flexing his fingers carefully. How long before I can use it again? For tasks requiring dexterity, perhaps 7 planetary rotations. For impact or force-bearing activities, closer to 12, he whistled. So no arm wrestling, not unless you enjoy compound fractures, not particularly. The medic collected its tools, placing them into a sterilization chamber that shimmered with internal blue light. Elias stood, testing the weight on his arm, then adjusted the sling that supported it. It looped over his shoulder and across his chest, keeping the brace immobile. As he stepped out of the infirmary, the corridor hummed with distant footfalls and low, echoing voices. The air outside the medical wing always smelled faintly of ozone and disinfectant. A group of Elarans passed him, their gelatinous forms pulsing in synchronized blues and purples, each encased in a mobile exo frame supported by gyroscopic legs. One of them slowed as it passed. You are the one who slid across the lake, Elias nodded. There are rumors you did it without a navigation core. That's true. The Elarans glow-pulsed yellow their version of astonishment. Statistically, that is inadvisable. Yeah, I figured that out halfway through. The group drifted on, their murmurs trailing like sea foam. Back in his assigned quarters, Elias set the sled frame against the far wall. Someone had cleaned it while he was out, probably a sanitation droid. He sat on the edge of the sleeping platform and pulled off his boots gingerly, the left one still damp from where he'd hit the ice. His ankle had begun to ache too. Nothing sharp or immediate, just the deep, hollow throb of connective tissue protesting sudden impact. He peeled off the rest of the suit and stood under the decontamination mist for a long minute, letting the charged particles clean away the grime. When he stepped out, his breath fogged the mirror, and he caught a glimpse of himself, wild hair, one eye slightly bloodshot, wrist bound in alien tech, and dark bruises already blooming along his ribs. The station's internal lights dimmed slightly, signaling rest cycle. Elias crawled into the sleep pod and lay staring at the ceiling, where the embedded panels showed a simulated sky stars wheeling slowly across an indigo dome. Hours passed. When the lights slowly brightened again, the walls shifted to a pale morning hue. A soft chime sounded from the comm panel. Crowder, Brunal's voice crackled through. Report to Observation Sector 7, Elias groaned. I still have a brace. Your presence is required for debrief. The line went dead. Observation Sector 7 was located near the upper arc of the station, where the dome curved inward like a giant lens. The room was shaped like a flattened cone, with viewing platforms around its perimeter and a central plinth topped with projection nodes. Elias arrived to find Brunal already there, flanked by 2 representatives from the Accord's Assessment Council. One resembled a cluster of mirrored spheres suspended in a gravity field. The other was tall and shrouded in a robe that shifted through a spectrum of translucent reds. Brunal gestured without ceremony. You may begin, Elias blinked. Begin what? Your account of the traversal event. Include all decisions, modifications, and risk evaluations. He hesitated, then stepped forward. I didn't have the physical endurance to cross on foot. And I knew the ice wouldn't support thrusters or heavy machinery. So I built something light, low friction, and passive no propulsion, just momentum. The mirrored spheres vibrated slightly, then aligned into a new pattern. A voice emerged, smooth and toneless. You improvised transport from discarded components. I repurposed what was available, Elias corrected. I assumed that was within the rules since it didn't violate the core constraint, and you sustained injury, fractured radius. Temporary impairment. Brunal turned toward the projection node. Display sled telemetry. A translucent model of the sled appeared mid-air, rotating slowly. It showed stress points, velocity arcs, and a heat map of structural integrity. The council members exchanged no visible signals, but the robed one lifted a hand, and the image froze. You chose a design that relied heavily on balance and directional input, it said. Why not construct a contained shell or use drag anchors for control? No time. I mean, I could have tried, but I'd have missed the window. Simpler was faster. Silence, then the mirrored spheres pulsed again. This suggests a behavioral trait consistent with short-term risk optimization. Humans are good at that, Elias said. Sometimes too good. Brunal's eyes dimmed. Your decision was high risk but not reckless. You analyzed constraints and adapted beyond standard parameters. I didn't see much choice, Elias said. The rules were the rules. They were, Brunal replied. But only one of you interpreted them as opportunity. Elias folded his good arm across his chest. What happens now, you will be assigned to the Adaptive Strategy Cohort, effective immediately, he blinked. I thought that was for diplomatic trainees. Brunal turned away. It is. He left the chamber in a daze, descending via the central lift that hummed softly as it dropped through levels of curved glass and alloy. The light outside had shifted to a pale lilac station dusk. On the lower promenade, a group of trainees clustered around a food dispenser arguing over flavor modules. One of them, a spindly creature with too many knees, made a high-pitched protest when the dispenser ejected a cube of something that sizzled. Elias kept walking. By the time he reached the Adaptive Strategy wing, his sling had started to chafe against his collarbone. He stepped into the orientation room to find a single occupant, a Tralkeshan with a long neck and iridescent scales that shimmered with each breath. The alien looked up from a console and tilted its head. You are the human, last I checked. I have been instructed to integrate your methods into our decision matrices. Sure, just don't ask me to cross that lake again. The Tralkeshan blinked its inner eyelids. We do not repeat trials, Elias smiled faintly. Good, because next time I'm building a catapult. The Adaptive Strategy wing was colder than the main dome. Not physically, it was climate regulated like everything else but in tone. The walls were metallic gray, unadorned except for a single mural near the entrance. A stylized depiction of various species clustered around a fractured planet, each one holding a piece of it together. It was meant to be inspiring, Elias guessed, though the Tralkeshan beside him merely stared at it like it was a wiring diagram. They had been assigned to work in tandem. Elias wasn't sure why he wasn't exactly known for his diplomacy, but apparently the council valued unconventional thinking. Or they were just hoping to see what happened when they mixed a problem-solving human with a protocol-obsessed reptilian tactician. The room they were in had no chairs. Tralkeshans didn't sit. Instead, Elias leaned against a low counter, cradling his healing wrist across his chest. You humans rely heavily on instinct, the Tralkeshan said without looking away from the display screen. That's one way to put it. Your decisions are often made in defiance of statistical models. Yeah. Sometimes the model doesn't know the terrain. The Tralkeshan turned one eye toward him. You mean the literal terrain? No, I mean life. There was a pause as the alien adjusted the input dials with its lower limbs. The screen flickered, displaying a series of simulations involving resource allocation during planetary crises. Elias recognized none of the scenarios. You will review the decisions made by previous cohorts under these same conditions, the Tralkeshan said. Then you will offer alternatives based on your species' tendencies. Is this a test? No, it is documentation. The council wants a comparative baseline. Elias tilted his head. You're profiling us, of course. He sighed and started reading the first scenario. A humanitarian supply ship had been delayed due to solar interference, and the colony receiving aid had only 2 days of water left. The prior cohort had opted to ration the existing supply and send drones to attempt minor atmospheric extraction. What would you have done? The Tralkeshan asked, watching him with a sideways glance. I'd have repurposed the ship's coolant system to run condensation fans and used human waste filtration as a secondary loop. The Tralkeshan's pupils narrowed. You would drink your own waste, if it's between that and dying of dehydration. Yeah, that is unorthodox. It's also why we're still around. The alien adjusted the dial again, highlighting Elias's suggestion and tagging it for further analysis. The next scenario involved a planetary evacuation where the available shuttles couldn't accommodate the entire population in one trip. "This already feels like a trap," Elias muttered. "What would you do?" "Who's being evacuated?" "Civilians." "No military assets." "Then I'd take the engineers and doctors first, leave behind instructions for how to build temporary shelters and ration food. First wave sets up a base on the new planet. Everyone else rotates through in shifts." The Tralkeshan blinked. "You would not prioritize political leaders." "I don't know what your species calls that, but where I'm from we call that a Tuesday." Later in the day, after 2 more simulations and a mandatory nutrient intake break, Elias rubbed the bridge of his nose with his good hand. "Is this what you do all day?" he asked. "Just run disasters and poke at the responses. It is essential work." "I didn't say it wasn't, I just thought it'd be more, I don't know, less theoretical. We simulate because reality cannot be rehearsed." Elias looked at the alien for a moment. "No. But it can be survived." The Tralkeshan regarded him for a long second. "You are less disagreeable than I anticipated. Most humans are unnecessarily loud." "I'm pacing myself." By the end of the 4th hour, they were reviewing a live feed case study from a mining colony dealing with a fungal infestation in its oxygen scrubbers. The local technicians had already tried sterilization, which failed, and were now considering abandoning the underground complex entirely. Elias leaned forward. "They should flood the system with carbon dioxide. That would suffocate the crew. Only if they stay inside. Evacuate, flood the ducts, wait 72 hours, then flush with clean air. There is a risk the fungus will adapt. Then you do it twice." The Tralkeshan processed this, then flagged the suggestion for review. "Why do you persist when the odds are poor?" "Because sometimes the odds are wrong." They continued working until the lights dimmed gently, an indicator of rest cycle beginning. Elias's back ached from leaning, and his wrist had started to tingle again under the brace. "You may depart," the Tralkeshan said. "I will compile your inputs." Elias nodded, stretching slowly. "Same time tomorrow." "Affirmative." As he walked the corridor back toward the living quarters, a maintenance bot scuttled past him, humming softly. He paused at the vending alcove and requested a hydration pack. It arrived lukewarm and tasted faintly of algae, but he drank it anyway. Back in his quarters, he removed the sling and flexed his fingers carefully. The swelling had gone down. The sheath's microstimulation was doing its job. The soreness was manageable, though the joint still felt stiff. He rotated it gently, listening for grinding none. He sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the wall panel. The image had changed. Instead of the standard station schematic, it now displayed a rotating archive of human inventions. The wheel, the printing press, a space capsule, a pocket knife. He hadn't programmed that. As he watched, a new image appeared. His sled rendered in high resolution, mid-glide across the lake, frozen mist trailing behind it. At the bottom, a small tag read, "Human Improvisation, Entry 001. He burst out laughing, not loud. Just surprised, honest laughter that echoed once in the quiet room and faded. He lay back on the bunk, arm across his chest, and stared at the ceiling. The stars in the simulation continued their slow turn. A chime sounded. A soft, short-tone external message, low priority. He tapped the panel beside his bed. A single line appeared. "Your adaptation metrics exceeded projection. We will observe further." No sender. No reply option. He stared at it for a moment, then closed the panel. "Observe all you want." The lights dimmed further. He rolled onto his side, careful not to press his brace against the mattress, and let the silence settle around him. There was nothing left to do but rest. And tomorrow, probably explain why humans once strapped themselves to rockets using leather straps and optimism. He'd bring diagrams.